Pittsburgh Steeler fans, how's it going today? This is not Jeff Hartman, editor of Behind the Steel Curtain for the BTSC's flagship podcast, The Standard is the Standard. This is Dave Schofield, the community manager, filling in for Jeff while he is sitting on a beach somewhere drinking pina coladas, as he would like to say about me. But luckily, as usual, we have the legendary Lance Williams. How's everything on the West Coast today, Lance?
What's up, gents? And I'm sure you guys looking at the YouTube channel are saying it is not Jeff, it's two fat guys talking Steelers.
I like it. I like it. We don't have to worry about talking about all that healthy stuff, do we?
Exactly. I had strips of bacon, grits, eggs, toast. I had all that good. Jeff was probably doing inverted push-ups, pull-ups, weight vests, all types of stuff. So you guys are going to get a calorie-filled show.
I'm going to admit, I've had two meals so far today, and both of them have involved bacon. So I'm a pretty happy guy right now. I do have to ask you one thing, Lance. How do you feel as someone on the West Coast? What do you think about when people call it the left coast?
I don't care. I'm from Pittsburgh, so it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Only thing I care about there is a city out here named Pittsburgh. And they spell it. I insist that they spell it with a G. If you put the H on the end, I'm definitely offended because Pittsburgh has an H to Pittsburgh and California has a G, and I make sure people know the difference.
There you go. So there is a difference to make sure they know that it's not the real Pittsburgh.
Exactly. I said the real
Gotcha.
Pittsburgh is with a H.
There you go. So you said you wanted to kick things off by probably I'm assuming it's going to be refuting what it was we were saying Thursday night on the Steelers preview when we were discussing who's had the better draft history since 2000, the Steelers or the Patriots.
Well,
So
it wasn't necessarily refuting. It was just giving a different perspective. So, longtime friend of the Standard and Standard, my previous shows when I was doing shows on my own, Jim Wexel of Steel City Insider, good friend of the program. We had a show we did years ago, and we were talking about the draft, and I was talking about how well the Steelers drafted, and what do you consider a good draft, and Jim did it. And he gave me a perspective that was just really simple. And he said everything comes down to wins and losses. He said, period. He said you could draft 8 guys, they all become Pro Bowlers, but if you go 4-12 for the next 5 years, how successful was that? So I tend to just look at everything through the lens of wins and losses. Now, if you go down through individual player, you might say the Steelers are better here, Steelers are better there. But I'll guarantee you, Steeler Nation will take some of those 6 Super Bowls that the Patriots got from the year 2000 in exchange for some bad draft picks. So when it comes down to it, it's just about winning. And to me, they've done a better job because they've won 6 Super Bowls since the year 2000.
you know what? That's really what it all comes down to. As everyone knows, I'm a big stats guy. I do a lot of stats articles. I like to throw out a bunch of numbers. It's mainly because that's just the way my brain works. It works better with numbers than with letters. And although I talk about all these other stats, you're exactly right. If the stats don't lead to wins, or then it really doesn't matter. The most important stats are the wins and losses. I brought up um, a few weeks ago where Jeff kind of got in trouble. It was actually your guys' podcast, and a lot of people were roasting him for the title that said, will Ben Roethlisberger have a bounce back year? And so many people came on screaming, well, he threw for 5,000 yards. What do you mean have a bounce back year? I'm like, but remember, these are the same people that are screaming, stats don't matter, only wins and losses. So Ben Roethlisberger didn't get 10 wins last year and get him to the playoffs. So even though he threw for 5,000 yards, to me, it needs to be a bounce back year because of the wins.
I agree, absolutely. I mean, if you're not competing to get a championship in Pittsburgh, in the city of Pittsburgh, it doesn't matter. I mean, it just doesn't matter. Those are empty calories like donuts, man. It's just empty calories. I don't. He could have threw for 7,000, but they didn't go to the playoffs. It doesn't matter. All of that is superfluous. The Patriots won again. They've now tied the Steelers, and it's terrible. I don't feel any better because he threw for 5,000 and now that team up north has 6 chips, just like the Steelers. Actually, I feel worse.
You're exactly right. I know exactly what you mean. That we have been in this, I guess I'd say, in this fantasy football age, we really do want to look on individual statistics. But as we can see, the focus on individual statistics the last couple of years, from a certain player who is not with the team anymore, but we'll just say they got a third and a fifth round pick for him. That was the thing we talked about Thursday night with between him and Hines Ward. Hines Ward wasn't worried about his statistics; he was worried about wins. Where Antonio Brown was not going to be happy unless he also had his stats to go with it.
I propose that for that guy's name, we just change it to Mr. Third and Fifth.
Mr. Third and Fifth. That is a fantastic idea. I
That'll
think
be
that's I got to remember to do that now. Let's go
hashtag
Mr.
Mr.
Third and
Third
Fifth.
and Fifth. That'd
There we
be,
go.
that'd be Mr. Third and Fifth.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good segue into the actual title for the show today when it's talking about statistics. And that is, now, this wasn't me coming in and trying to run Jeff and Lance's show. I said, Lance, I'm mainly here to set up everything on YouTube for you. This is your baby. You make sure we're doing what you want to do. And he says, let's talk about 5 stats that the Steelers need to improve in order to get to and win the Super Bowl. So, you know me, I'm all over it. So, we discussed it a little bit and figured out which statistical categories do we think would directly lead to more wins and wins in the playoffs in order to get that 7th Lombardi. So, you just want to jump right in here with them, Lance? And
Yeah, we'll jump right into it. I'll jump into the first one. And the first one I think is the most obvious. It may not be the most important over the 5. We'll discuss that as well. I'd be interested to see you guys in the live chat. You guys think, what do you think you're important of the most 5? And so the first one, and we've talked about it ad nauseum on every particular podcast. We've talked about it over and over. It's turnovers and turnover margin. And when you look at the rankings in terms of the 12 playoff teams last year, Seattle, Houston, Chicago, the Rams, New England, Kansas City, New Orleans, Dallas, Indy, the Chargers, Baltimore, and Philly. And we did all of these statistics in regards to the playoff teams because it doesn't matter. I mean, you have to compare yourself to the playoff teams. The other teams don't matter. Now, in terms of turnovers, the Steelers ranked 29th, which would be dead last for all the playoff teams. And in turnover margin plus minus, they were a minus 11, which ranked 28th in the National Football League, which was the worst of all the playoff teams. And when you look at turnovers and you look at turnover margin, turnovers equate to possessions. You take away possessions from another team, so you make it harder for another team to score against you, and you give yourself more possessions, so it's easier to score. And a lot of times when you get turnovers and extra possessions, you probably get better field position when you get those turnovers. So I think that's one of the biggest categories in which the Steelers have to get better is the number of turnovers and turnover margin.
I think you're exactly right. Now, when you say turnovers, are you meaning offensive turnovers or defensive takeaways?
It's just plus minus. So with plus
Plus
minus,
minus.
it's
Okay.
both. So it's both.
Gotcha. Well, I completely agree that turnover margin is a good one, and I feel that the more driving force behind that turnover margin is the takeaways more than the turnovers, because I like to go back and point out the 79 Steelers, where they had, I think they were minus 20 in the plus minus uh, turnover margin, because they had 32 takeaways, but they had 52 turnovers. So they were just slinging the ball around and coughing it up all over the place. But to me, I think the driving force behind that turnover margin, your offense is going to turn it over sometime, but if your defense is not taking it away, you cannot get a positive turnover margin if you don't have takeaways.
Absolutely. I think when you look at the Steelers, and you guys discussed it on your show, we've discussed it, me and Jeff discussed it, they got to get more interceptions. They
Yes.
they they have to get more interceptions to try to turn that turnover margin into a positive. They can't be minus 11, I think, next year and try to get to the Super Bowl because, like you said, with that 79 Steeler team, are they going to get 39 turnovers? I mean, is that defense going to get in the 30s in turnovers? I mean,
No.
Chicago was number one in NFL last year with 36. The Rams were third with 30. New England was fifth with 28. This is of the playoff teams. I mean, are they going to get 36 turnovers? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, especially when they're coming off of they're tied for their franchise low of 15 takeaways. 15 takeaways. Well, I think the other year was 2011, and it's the only 2 years in the history of the Steelers that they were under 20 takeaways. So it's not, I mean, sacks are great and everything else, but if they're not leading the takeaways, you are just giving up extra possessions. You are the other team is obviously going to have more possessions than you in a game. So I think that's a good one to start with. You want me to go ahead and roll into the next one?
Before we roll into the next one, give me a number in terms of total turnovers you want this defense to produce next year.
Uh well, you talking about what I would want or what I think they could
Or what do you think?
realistically do?
What do you think they'll realistically get next year?
I'm gonna I would say realistically, if they could get to 22, I mean, get 7 more than last year, that would be enough of an improvement if you continue to take care of the ball, but they would also have to cut down on their turnovers on offense as well. So, if I really wanted it, I would say 27.
I like that number. I was thinking 25, and I think on both sides of it, it's interceptions. Get more, give up fewer. Ben throws
Exactly.
fewer picks, they get more picks. That's your difference. That's your margin. That goes up. If they got 27, I think the seventh Lombardi would be something that would be something realistic. But jump into the next one, Jeff. Excuse
All
me,
right.
Dave.
That's all right. It's okay. You are not going to offend me by saying Jeff. The next one, which was one that I thought was very important, was I kind of lumped two together, but one of them's more than the other, and that is field goal percentage. Because last year, this part of the reason the Steelers did not even get to the playoffs was how many games did they not finish because they couldn't get that field goal at the end. They ended up with a tie against Cleveland because they had the first crack at a field goal in overtime, and therefore they ended up in a tie. They ended up, with the terrible slip in Oakland that could have tied that game and sent it to overtime, and who knows what would have happened there. That the Steelers, if you look at just field goal percentage, they were next to last in the league, next to last, 31st. And the next worst team, I do believe. Let me double check what we had with that there. The next worst team with that was the Chicago Bears, who were 27th. Now, if you look at the actual percentage, the Steelers' field goal percent was 69.6%. I mean, they didn't even get 70% of their field goals. They couldn't even get 7 out of 10. Chicago was, when I say that was the worst playoff team, and everything that we're doing here, we're comparing the Steelers to the 12 teams that were in the playoffs. And the Bears ranked 27th with 76.7%. But you also got to remember with that, what happened to the Bears? The Bears
Yeah,
lost their playoff game
yeah.
because, and if you know any Bears fans, they're going to tell you, we knew this is what was going to happen. This has been killing us all year, and this is what's going to happen. Is they missed the field goal to win the game,
That
and they
hit
were
three
knocked out.
posts, didn't it? That hit three posts. That was a three-post shot.
If I remember right, it was right there. That was, I couldn't imagine being a Bears fan in that moment and having it doink, 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 and just, yeah, that was insane.
Yeah, that was funny. That's when that fan just went apoplectic after the game and was tweeting or trending all over the world. He went nuts.
Yep.
That guy went absolutely nuts. But when you look at these percentages, Dave, I mean, 69% ranking 31st in field goal percentage, and you haven't even gotten to the PATs, but they were 30th. They were ranked 30th in the NFL in PATs at 89.9. I
Yeah.
mean, I hate to be that guy that flips things back and say, if you could change just one thing, what would you change last year in the Steel? Like, like it's a sum of its total parts, right? If you don't make the playoffs, it's not just one thing, it's a total team letdown and breakdown. But man, when you look at these percentages, it might have just been the kicking game. Regardless of everything else, it may have just been the kicking game, the field goals, and the PAT efficiency that let the Steelers down. If they do better, if they're just middle of the road, let's say they have the same percentage as, let's say, Indy, who ranked 15 at 85%. They make the playoffs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yeah, Indy was ranked 15th at 85.2 and New England was 16th. I mean, dead center at 84.4%. If the Steelers have that, they make the playoffs. This is just something I just got to thinking about, Lane. You were not at the game in Oakland this year, were you?
Yes, I was at that game.
You were at that game. Okay, I'm going to ask you this question. If the Steelers on that play with Juju, basically the old hook and ladder play that they ran that got them down there for that field goal, if the Steelers were down by 4 points, do you think Juju cuts that back and makes it to the end zone?
No, I thought he would have got caught.
Do you think he would have got caught?
I
Because
thought
a
he
lot
got
of
caught.
people were like, "What if he would have just kept going and not relied on the field goal?" He did the smart thing. He went out of bounds in field goal range, made sure he stopped the clock, had enough time for everything. But I just was wondering your perspective from someone there if you thought that was something they could have done. Because too many people are like, "Man, as bad as our kicking's been, we can't trust it. We should have just gone for the TD."
Yeah, and it's impossible for a player to think that. He's in the moment. He's trying to make the play. He's not thinking, well, Boz sucks, so I'm going to cut this in and try to score. I mean, that's not going through his mind. He made the heady, intelligent football play. Boz just has to execute.
Yeah, he didn't try to run the guy over on the goal line and fumble it out of the end zone.
Man,
He
that
made
was,
a smart football play.
I had to apologize on our show a couple of Sundays ago when I tried to argue that that wasn't a dumb play by Xavier Grimble. He was trying to make a football play, and I had to just apologize and walk all that back. When I watched it again, and I just said that was just a dumbass play. I mean, that was just a dumbass football play. One of the dumb plays this year that caused the Steelers an opportunity to play for a championship.
All right. Well, I don't want to add too much, down a different rabbit trail, but I'm going to ask you one quick question about that since you brought it up about that Grimble play. Was part of that play, do you think, was the byproduct of all the popularity Vance McDonald got from the massive stiff arm?
I don't know. I just think, man, it was just one of those dumbass brain fart moments. Like, I'm not even going to give it any more credit or credence than what it was. I think it was just a dumbass young football dude trying to blow somebody up. And, I think he was just excited, man, caught up in the moment. He had his opportunity to score. He hadn't been playing a lot of football, made a really good play, trying to make an impression so he can get more snaps. I think it was from that. I think he had a positive intent, but it was a dumbass play, and it just went. It was horrible.
Yeah,
it was terrible.
Yeah, exactly. But that's you can, as a former coach, you can look at every single win and loss that you have, and you can narrow it down to a couple plays that just happen to go the right way or the wrong way in any single game. And what's funny is any one of those plays could have been that play.
Yes. And that was one of them. But let's jump into the next stat. And this was one that I kind of pulled up. This one is kind of eggheadish, but I think you guys were talking about, I think you might have been talking about it on you guys' last show about points and scoring. And so I wanted to look up yards per point. And yards per point is simply as it sounds. How many yards does it take you to get 1 point? And so presumably you want to score points getting fewer yards. And
exactly.
This stat is unbelievable. I just want to say this Kansas City stat is absolutely unbelievable. Now, everybody's listening to this show knows that a first down is 10 yards. They scored 1 point every 12 yards. That is absolutely unbelievable that it only would take them 360 yards to get 30 points. I mean, that is so mind-boggling. That is, I've never seen anything that absolutely ridiculous. And scoring was so ridiculous last year that New Orleans was second at 12.4, Seattle at 13.2, the Rams at 13.4, Chicago 13.4, and the Chargers at 13.7. You had, what is that, six teams that under 14 yards per point. That's absolutely incredible. So we were talking about, me and Jeff were talking about, what do you fear most? Do you fear defenses? And we came to the conclusion, hell no. Nobody fears defenses. You fear offenses now. And this was ridiculous. The Steelers were further down in the rankings in the NFL at 14 at 15.1. And so it would take the Steelers presumably 453 yards to get 30 points. That's a difference from Kansas City, of about 100 yards. Let's just round it up in 100 yards. And that's big. That's huge. If you've got to get 100 extra yards than, say, Kansas City to get 30, I think that's a big difference. What's your thoughts?
I think the way you put that into perspective, where you said they only needed 360 yards to score 30 points, that's the perspective to think of. Because generally offense, you get that many points in the air sometimes, let alone thrown in the rushing attack in most games. So just to think, hey, if we get 360 yards in a game, we're going to score 30 points. Sign me up for that, you know, every day and twice on Sunday. That's just insane. But in essence, this really comes down to, are you maximizing your drives? When
Yes.
you move the football, are you getting it into the end zone? Because the one thing that does drive this number down is what happens when you have those three and out drives of 0 yards. That's not hurting this statistic because you're not putting forth any yards whenever you punt. So it's almost like every time you move the ball, it's got to end up in the end zone. Is the way that this stat gets driven up.
I mean, this is, like you said, this is absolutely unreal. And this also goes to turnovers as well, and drive starts and stuff like that. Because I'm going to guarantee you, not even looking at it, that Kansas City's average starting field position was probably fantastic. They probably started a bunch of drives in their opponent's negative territory, and they're just bang bang Tyreek Hill 2 plays, from a team's 40-yard line, bang bang touchdown. I mean, look at the scores that Kansas City had against the Steelers. I mean,
Yeah.
that was fast. It was bang, bang, Travis Kelce, bang, 45-yard slant, bang, touchdown. I mean, it was just bang, bang, big plays. That's big plays, turnovers, drive starts. And when you're going up against an offense that explosive, as good as the Steelers' offense was last year, you can see that the Steelers still need to improve. Because when you look at yards per point, Dallas was last amongst the playoff teams at 16.2. So the Steelers, there is room for improvement to get that yards per point down in the range of a 13, like the Chargers, like the Bears, like the Rams. But getting it to 12, that may never happen again
Yeah.
in the National Football League.
I don't know. Do you think? I'd like to know where that stands historically. That's got to be possibly the best we've ever seen. Can you think of a team
The
that
only
was more
team,
offensively prolific than that?
the only team I would think that would come close, if not is that Patriots team that was rolling up 50-point games on people. I think it was the Randy Moss year, I think, when they went
Mhm.
undefeated, that they scored 50, I think, at least 6 times that year. And there was a point at time of that year, they were averaging like 38, 39 points a game. They were rolling teams that year. That might be the only offense I think that would approach that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties here, but that's just a wonderful point there, Lance. That there we go. Haha. My technical difficulties are solved. Um, Sorry about that. So to me, I assume this also includes all points scored. So, like, if your defense is scoring touchdowns, that's really helping
Yeah,
everything out, correct?
yeah, it does. It does. It
Okay.
does. So it would probably go up some in terms of yards per point if you took out defensive scores. But
Yeah.
a team like the Steelers, that 15.1 is pure offense because I don't think they had like maybe one or two defensive turnover scores. I think did Bud Dupree score against Tampa Bay, or was it? I think it was Bud Dupree scored on an interception.
Bud
I
scored
believe.
against Tampa, and Vince Williams scored against Carolina.
So there you go. The Steelers only had two defensive touchdowns. So that's pure. That's a pure offensive stat for the
Yeah.
Steelers. But jump into your next stat, Jeff.
Yes.
Excuse me, Dave.
Yeah. The next one I'm looking at is, I think it's kind of a cause and effect stat, because this one, let's just say, as someone who used to coach football, this is not a stat that you're ever going to think of during a game. But this almost goes to show you how everything's going for you. And that is very, very simple: rushing attempts per game. How often are you rushing the football? Now, when you're in a bad situation and you're down by a bunch of points, there's times you just got to abandon the run and try to do everything you can to get back in the game. But if you're in those situations, that means chances are you're not going to be a team that is looking to be the number one contender for the Super Bowl, because you're constantly being down by multiple scores. But the Steelers were next to last in the NFL in how many rushing attempts they had per game. The only team that was worse was the Green Bay Packers. And the Steelers only rushed the ball on average 21.6 times a game, which, like we said, was ranked 31st. Now, comparing that to the playoff teams, was obviously, most people would probably realize that it was the Ravens that ranked the highest, because they rushed the ball 34.2 times per game, which is, to me, I think that's just an insane amount in today's NFL. But if you look down at the playoff teams, I'm not even going to say what team they were, but if you just look at what their ranks were: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10. So they were 8 of the top 10 rushing attempts per game teams were teams that went to the playoffs. So that
I
could be
was shocked.
because you
I was
what's
shocked.
that?
I was
Oh,
shocked.
really?
Yeah, I was shocked that it was that high. And let's just point out the team that won the championship ran it 30 times a game.
Yeah, 29.9, which I would say, yes, round that to 30. And that's how often they ran the football.
And Drew Brees and those guys ran it 29 times a game.
Yes, they did. They were only a couple ranks behind them. They were fifth. That's just even these teams that you think are high passing offenses. Now, Kansas City was down there. They did most of their damage through the air, but they were still at 24.2. So they were actually the worst playoff team when it came to rushing attempts per game. But that was still 24.2.
Think about it this way. The MVP's team, Patrick Mahomes, ran at 24.2, right?
Yeah.
The arguable GOAT, NFL GOAT, Tom Brady, Tom Terrific, Mr. 6X himself, 30 times. Drew Brees, one of the best quarterbacks in the modern era, ran it 30 times. The Rams' prolific offense ran it 28 times.
Mm-hmm. Almost 29, 28.7.
Answer this for me.
Mm-hmm.
Why are the Steelers running the ball 21 times a game?
Well, Lance, here's what's crazy is how much it varies per game. I mean, they had 2 games this past season where they only ran the ball 11 times. 11 times. And what's crazy is they won one of them. One of them was the game in Jacksonville. They had to come from behind to win at the last second, but they only ran the ball 11 times.
Let's
Then you
add
get
this. Let's add this to that and,
okay.
and finish your point. And they had a running back who made the Pro Bowl.
Exactly. He hadn't been. That was when he was still healthy. That was pre-injury. So that was right there. And what's crazy is the Steelers, as bad as that stat sounds, you have to remember, in week 1, James Conner had 31 rushes for 135 yards. He rushed the ball 31 times in week 1. So that's where they're starting. And yet by the time they finish up, they're all the way down to only 21.6 attempts per game.
Is that Ben? Is that Ben being been in wanting to pad stats possibly? Do you think that's the game dictating the number of attempts? I mean, the thing that was the most interesting to me is going into the Denver game, Denver was comically bad in run defense. Everybody thought that the Steelers were going to go in there and run the football, but they did the exact opposite. And I believe he threw the ball over 50 times in that game. Is this a Ben issue? Is this an offensive philosophical issue? I mean, why do you think we see this level of variance in the rushing attempts?
That's I'd like to say that a lot of it is situational because sometimes it is. I also feel that when a ball was thrown within 3 yards of the line of scrimmage, it is in essence a run. So that is something that if that was easier to break down, a lot of times those short passes. Now they had just as many last year with James Conner as they did the year before when the other he who shall not be named was notorious for catch the ball out of the backfield. So that's one thing that does contribute to that some is that short passing. But those other teams, you think New England doesn't do the same thing? You think New Orleans doesn't do the same thing? They're all notorious. The Rams, of course, with Todd Gurley, they're constantly dumping off balls to the running backs as well. But still, they're getting close to averaging 30 rushes a game. Um, the key is getting a good lead. That really helps. I think the reason the Steelers ran the ball so much against Cleveland was because they led that game most of the time, and it was in the rain. But then they ended up in just a tie. So, and then against Jacksonville, they ran it 11 times because it just seemed like they couldn't get it going. So I think sometimes I think what you brought up, like against Denver, is one thing that bothers me at times. And we talk about balance and everything else, and how balance really is not necessarily running it as much as passing it. I mean, I'm happy with the 2-to-1 ratio of two passes for every run. That still works pretty well. It's the ability to be able to do whichever one you need to do. That's
Right.
truly balance. And the problem is sometimes I feel like the Steelers want to impose their will on somebody more than take what is given to them, if that makes sense. They
Yeah.
want to do what they want to do to show that they can do it rather than, hey, if you're not good at this, we're going to exploit it. And that's what we're going to do. And really, you need to take what they're going to give you. If they're not good at defending the run the ball at them. If they've got if they're weak in the middle of the field in their secondary, throw it. Hit your tight ends a lot. Do whatever the other teams. You got to find their weakest point and exploit it. That's what championship teams do.
Yeah, and I agree that of these four stats, and we're going to jump into the last one, red zone defense. This is one that definitely has to improve. I think, I think a lot of Steeler Nation will probably try to blame Mister Third and Fifth as possibly a reason for it because maybe passes were being forced to that guy. But I think that has to change somewhat. The last category is red zone defense. The last stat of the playoff teams, the Steelers' red zone percentage. This is their defense, and this is touchdowns. So, how many times did an opponent score a touchdown in the Steelers' defensive red zone? The Steelers gave up 59.2. I'll round it up. That was their red zone percentage. That ranked 16th in the National Football League. Of the playoff teams, they were underneath the Rams, so they would have ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, ninth. The worst team was Houston. Kansas City was terrible. Kansas City had one of the most ridiculously it's just a ridiculously statistical season where they had some weird stats. Kansas City scored the most points, but their red zone defense was awful. They gave up 71% touchdowns when teams had it in their red zone, which was 29th. It didn't make a difference because they scored, as we stated, in yards per point. It only took them 360 yards to score 30 points, and they averaged, I believe, 37 a game. So it offset that, even though they gave up a bunch of points. New England, interestingly enough, ranked 24th in the National Football League at 64%. I think the Steelers' red zone defense is probably around where it not really needs to be, but I think they can kind of get away with that because if you look at the playoff teams, the Chargers ranked 10th, Indy 11, and this is NFL ranking, Rams 15th, Baltimore 21st, New Orleans 23rd, New England 24th, Kansas City 29th, and Houston 31st. So what it says is that even good teams had issues stopping people in the red zone. If you look at the stats further, Philadelphia, other playoff teams, Philadelphia ranked first in the National Football League at 45%. That's absolutely outstanding. Seattle was second in terms of the playoff teams, ranked fourth overall in the National Football League at 50%. Chicago and Dallas rounded that out at 51%, respectively, sixth and seventh. What's your thought on the red zone, their red zone defense? And if it needs to get better, where do you think it needs to rank in terms of the NFL?
I think if you can get into that top 10, get it really close to that 50% would, I mean, think about it. That's the difference of 4 points every time. Are you holding them to the 3 or are you holding them to the 7?
Right.
Now that includes, I'll be honest with you, part of the reason that that's not nearly as what it should be for the Steelers is their lack of takeaways. Now I know they had, I'm trying to think how many takeaways they had in the red zone last year. Where the other team was in the red zone, they took it away. I know they did it in Tampa when I can't remember who tipped the ball, but Mike Hilton ended up with the interception on a tip ball. I'm thinking it was Bostic might have got his hands on it. Which is a really big deal. You get into that red zone and you come away with no points. That's what you ultimately would really like. But I'd kind of like to know, because obviously I don't know this off the top of my head, even though you try to say I'm the oracle of all Steelers knowledge. Where did the Steelers in those Dick LeBeau defenses where they had that tendency to be called bend but don't break? They'd give up the yardage, but they'd really dig in and hold, not keep the teams out of the end zone. I wonder where they sat with red zone efficiency.
Probably top five. Probably top five because those defenses didn't give up a ton of points. But the interesting thing about this stat, it doesn't necessarily tie directly to points you give up per game. So you could have a terrible red zone defense, but you only give up one red zone trip a game. So let's say, you can give up 16 red zone trips in 16 games and give up a touchdown in each. You'd be giving up 7 points a game, but your red zone efficiency would be dead last at 100%. So it can be misleading if you don't really peel it back and take a look at the stat. So, maybe a more important stat than this would be red zone attempts.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. How many times did the team get into the red zone on you? Because if you're constantly keeping them out of the red zone, that's great. Now, but the thing that doesn't take into account is when teams score long touchdowns against you.
Yeah. So, and some teams consider the red zone 30 yards in now.
Yeah.
With the passing games in the NFL. So, there's no difference if they score from the 35 as opposed to the 20. But in theory, to your point, you want to prevent red zone trips.
Exactly. And I like what you said about thinking about the red zone being the 30, because basically that's field goal range. Once you reach field goal range, that in essence should be the stat that you're looking at is, did the team get into field goal range or not? So yeah, this is interesting. The Steelers weren't terrible at red zone percentage, but it is an area that they could improve. So
that's the 5. So that's the 5.
You want to look at these 5 and say which one you think is the most important?
Is anybody in the live chat? Anybody in the live chat commenting?
Let's see. Snowman was saying that they need to be in the top 10 for when we were talking about the red zone efficiency. I haven't been looking back too much. So yeah, that's something to throw out in the live chat. Which one of these 5 stats? It was turnover margin. I'm just going to cut it down to these slash ones, just to one of them. Turnover margin, field goal efficiency, yards per point, rushing attempts, and red zone defense. Which one do you feel is the one that they need to improve on the most in order to get to the playoffs, be successful in the playoffs, and ultimately hoist that Lombardi trophy at the end of the season?
I hate to do the obvious one, but I just hate to do the obvious one. As bad as they were in terms of turnovers and turnover margin, it has to be that one.
It has to be that. It
Yeah,
does. It really does.
it just has to be that one. I was
Hmm.
thinking that maybe as we talk through this, maybe it's another one. I mean, the other one would be red zone defense, I think. So if I were to rank them, it would be turnovers. I think it would be red zone defense. I think it would be field goal, PAT efficiency, yards per point, then rushing attempts.
Yeah.
I'm picking the ones that are directly attached to scoring.
What's interesting here is like I said, coming from a coach's perspective, turnover margin, field goal efficiency, and red zone defense are things that you're going to focus on in game. Hey, we got them deep. We got to defend every blade of grass, keep them out of the end zone. Hey, we got to knock this through the uprights. Hey, we got to take care of the ball. We got to take the ball away. You're not thinking about yards per point. And in
No,
all honesty, as someone who was an offensive coordinator for a couple of years, I'm not thinking about how many times I rush the ball. I'm thinking about moving the football down the field either way that I can.
right.
So I'm not focusing on making sure I get so many rushing attempts. But so that's kind of the way I look at it. So I think the yards per point and rushing attempts are important, but they kind of take a back seat because they're not something that you can in game specifically
Right,
focus
right. I
on.
would agree. They're icing stats. They're
Yeah.
kind of like icing on top of the carrot cake. Carrot cake is good if it's just good carrot cake, but it's great carrot cake if that cream, what is it, cream cheese frosting is just fantastic. Then it's over the
Yep.
top. That's what
Yep.
yards per point and rushing attempts are. Rushing attempts, I know as a coordinator, you probably watched the game. You kind of got a feel for it. You would see if you were handling things up front and you could settle the game down and kind of dictate and take control, you run it more. Let's slow it down. Let's pound this team so we can get into some of our other stuff. But if we can keep running the ball down their throat and it works, we'll run. But you don't, like you said, you don't go into a game saying we've got to run it 25 times to win this game.
Yeah. Well, from the live chat, we're getting a lot of people saying, obviously, the turnover differential, turnover margin, field goal. Some people, 410, what is that? 410 Carpenter Legend said field goal killed us. Thomas White says with last year's stats, if field goal success was 100%, we win the Super Bowl. So, I mean, I don't think we'd ever get to 100% field goal, but that's a really good point. So, a lot of people are saying the field goals last year killed us, but that turnover differential is just one of those things that's going like a slow grind.
And if you look at the turnovers and the turnover margin, couple that with PATs, right? So
Yeah.
to the caller's point, to the listener's point, as bad as they were with turnovers, that if they make a few more kicks, they get to the playoffs and
Yeah.
they probably get a 2 seed. So does that mean this team is that good?
It goes to show you how little margin for error there is in the NFL.
Yes, yes.
I think that's what that shows. That if you, I mean, think about it. If just switch two kickers, switch Justin Tucker and Chris Boswell.
Yeah.
The Steelers, or the AFC Championship, if not in the Super Bowl, and the Ravens are sitting at home
Yeah.
this past season.
Yeah. You hate that with all of this, all the breakdown, all the shows, all the practices, all the pass plays. And that's the beauty of the NFL. It gets down to 6 plays, 5, 6 plays, your whole season turns.
Yeah.
And it's a success or it's a failure. 5 kicks. He makes 5 kicks. They're
Yeah.
competing for that 7th Lombardi.
And that includes those PATs, because there's times where that single point really does come back to bite you. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at the specific instances this past year that that they that point made a difference with things going forward. It changed a one-score game into a two-score game, or just how you played everything out from a first quarter missed extra point, or how everything played out with how you did everything when it came to PATs and field goals from that point on. Just even those little plays really matter.
And looking at the PATs, the field goal and PAT efficiency stats, it's amazing that there is a camp battle. I mean, it's amazing that there is a camp battle with Boz, as bad as Boz was last year. And looking at just how important that was in the Steelers' success last year, maybe that's the only camp battle that matters.
Yeah, and you guys had talked about this last week. I think you said that you felt that if Boswell's not the kicker, it's going to be someone else that's brought in, not the battle going on. For me to sum it up, it's Boswell's job to lose. It's Wright's job to win, to show that they have to keep him because he's that good. And that's how it's going to play out. That even if Matt Wright's pretty good, it's going if Boswell shows that he's got it, then he's going to be the guy. If Boswell still struggles and Wright shows that he's better than anything else they can find out there, then it's going to be his. But it could just as likely be, is there anybody on the scrap heap we can pick up that's going to be better?
Yeah, I would advise anybody in the live chat, if you're a soccer style kicker, start stretching, getting your hamstrings right, start kicking the ball, because you might be able to make about 350 to about 500 grand next year. Get the college fund all chunky. You might be the Steelers' place kicker next season. But speaking of college stuff, I did want to take this time out to send a big thanks to my daughter's right now. She's in France. She's abroad doing a European abroad program. She's been in France for like the whole month of July. Want to send a big shout out to her, and also want to send a big shout out to her host family, who's done a fantastic job of taking care of her. Thank you to you guys for treating my daughter like a princess. So thank you.
There you go. I want to give a shout out here on the live chat. Today is Jared Devil's birthday. He wants to know what our favorite type of cake is.
My favorite type of cake, huh? I'm not really a cake guy. I'm a pie guy.
That's what you wanted for our either or Thursday night. I saw you throw that in the,
Yes,
in the
yes.
live chat.
I'm a pie cobbler guy. But if I had to pick a cake, I think my favorite cake is pound cake. Number two would be German chocolate cake. Number three would be a classic yellow cake with chocolate icing.
There you go. I can pound about any cake that you put in front of me. Um, I yeah, if it's cake, I'll eat it. To me, double chocolate's a little bit too much. If I'm doing a chocolate cake, I'd want a white icing. Um, my wife doesn't cook. I do all the cooking here at our house, but she did take a class in decorating cakes. So she makes her own icing and decorates cakes and loves doing it. And I don't mind eating them. I just don't want her to do it that often because I can't afford to eat too much cake because I'm trying to get my weight going in the downward direction rather than the upward direction. But red velvet's another good one. But if you want chocolate icing, then it's yellow cake with chocolate icing. That's the big
Red
combo.
velvet. Red velvet is the most overrated cake.
It's basically chocolate cake. It's
Yes, it is.
basically chocolate cake that if you eat too much of it, you then worry about having a medical condition when you don't realize that it's just red dye leaving your body. Um,
Absolutely.
so at this point here, Lance, anything else you want to do here before we close out the show?
No, man. Thank goodness training camp is coming up soon. Jeez, we need it. I think anybody that does NFL stuff, NFL coverage, Steelers stuff, everybody is just training camp needs to get here immediately.
I agree. I agree that it's been a long time just trying to fill content, hasn't it, Lance? Just trying to figure out something to talk about.
Yeah.
But I tell you, I've loved having nothing to talk about for the last, what is it, 4.5 weeks? Because it's what do we got? About a week and a half? Week and a half, yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
So because it's great. It's nothing to talk about is such good news right now. I love that there's not all the big drama going on. I mean, you get little Twitter tiffs going on between the former Steeler and current Steeler that didn't like the way they said something, but I'm like, if that's the worst thing going on right now, it's not even worth mentioning.
Yeah, I kind of like that the Steelers are just under the radar, like a
Yeah.
nice, calm, under the radar. Mr. Third and Fifth is not wilding out. Mr. I get robbed by butt naked scrippers is not acting wild. So I love it when it's just a calm summer, the calm before the storm, obviously, as Tomlin would say.
Exactly. And I hope the Steelers listen to this and improve on these five things. I was at a nice gaming establishment Friday night. I don't go that often, but I was there getting my blackjack on, and it just so happened to be at one where they do have where you can place your wagers on professional sports. I was very disappointed that all they had was week one of the NFL because I really wanted to get some of my action on some of the later lines that I like right now. But just for fun, I had to throw that bet out there, that 20-1 odds of the Steelers winning the Super Bowl. So I at least got a little bit on that now. I'd finished up a little bit for the night, so I just took that and said, "Here, let's put it towards what we can do for a Super Bowl victory." So I'm ready for this. I'm ready to get it started.
I might have to get on that, but Dave, I'm gonna take us out with the famous tagline:
Exactly.
"Tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe."